In a world where mystery shrouds reality, where hope and despair dance on the thin line of uncertainty, there is a case that has perplexed investigators, haunted a family, and left us all questioning the very essence of human existence. Picture this: a promising young medical student, full of dreams and aspirations, suddenly vanishes into thin air after a night out with friends. It's a chilling tale that has gripped our hearts for nearly a decade. But one thing remains constant: the unyielding determination of his family, who have refused to let go of hope, even when faced with the most daunting of circumstances. Was it a simple case of someone wanting to uproot their life and start anew? Or perhaps the depths of despair led him to a tragic fate of his own making? These questions have gnawed at the souls of those who followed this enigmatic story. There's always more than meets the eye. Could there be a hidden, sinister truth lurking beneath the surface? Prepare yourselves for a journey through the labyrinthine twists and turns of this perplexing case, where secrets are buried deep and the truth is an ever-elusive specter. Welcome back to Crime Case Files. Join us as we venture into the depths of the unknown, where the only certainty is uncertainty itself. American medical student Brian Shaffer, born on February 25, 1979, attended Ohio State University. After going out with friends on the evening of March 31, 2006, to welcome spring break, Brian became separated from them, and they assumed he had returned home. At 2:00 a.m. on April 1, a security camera outside a bar in Columbus saw him having a brief conversation with two ladies before returning to the establishment. Since then, Brian has not been contacted. The matter has been extensively covered by the national media. The mystery surrounding Brian's disappearance has left investigators scratching their heads, and it's a perplexing puzzle that's gripped the city of Columbus. Picture this: one fateful night, there was just a single escape route from the bar, and yet, Brian managed to vanish into thin air. It's like something out of a suspense thriller. Now, the Columbus police are deep into their investigation, and they've cooked up a multitude of theories to explain what might have transpired. One of the most intriguing leads points a finger at one of Brian's buddies who was right there with him that very night. What's particularly baffling is that this friend has refused to take a polygraph test regarding the incident. Suspicion runs deep, and the plot thickens. But that's not the only twist in this tale. Enter the alleged smiley-faced serial murderer, a shadowy figure who has, at least in theory, a connection to Brian's case. Rumor has it that this enigmatic character might still be out there, lurking in the shadows, possibly even operating under a different identity. It's the kind of stuff that gives you goosebumps and leaves you wondering if there's more to this story than meets the eye. Buckle up, folks, because this mystery just got a whole lot darker and a whole lot more thrilling. Brian Shaffer, the elder of Randy and Renee Shaffer's two children, hails from the Columbus suburb of Pickerington. After graduating from the local high school in 1997, he pursued higher education at Ohio State University, OSU, where he spent 6 years dedicated to the study of microbiology before earning his degree. Brian also has a younger brother named Derek. Little did he know that his life would soon be marked by a perplexing disappearance that continues to captivate and baffle investigators and the public alike. After that, in 2004, Brian enrolled at the OSU College of Medicine. As he was in his second year at the university, his mother passed away from myelodysplasia. Friends of Brian's believe that despite appearances, he is struggling with the loss of his mother. Brian's romantic involvement with Alexis Wagoner began during his time in medical school. She and their loved ones assumed that Brian would pop the question to her sometime in 2006, possibly during their spring break trip to Miami at the start of April. Brian had an admiration for tropical cities like Miami because of the laid-back culture there. Despite his commitment to become a doctor, Brian has been open with his pals about his secret desire to form a Jimmy Buffett-style band. The final day of school before spring break at OSU was Friday, March 31. Brian and his dad, Randy, went out for a steak supper earlier in the evening to celebrate the occasion. Earlier in the week, Brian's father had seen that his son had been pulling all-nighters to prepare for some approaching examinations. There were some things he was worried about regarding Brian's plans to hang out with his friend William Florence, aka Clint, that night, but he didn't share those things with his son. At 9 o'clock, Brian and Clint hung out at the ugly Tuna Saluna in Columbus South Campus Gateway Complex on High Street. Alexis had gone back to her house in Toledo to see her family one more time before she and Brian left for Miami, and Brian contacted her an hour later. After leaving one bar, Brian and Clint visited a few more on their way down to the Arena District. They got a shot of strong liquor at each location. At midnight, Brian and Clint went to the Short North to see Meredith Reed, a mutual friend of theirs. Reed drove them back to the bar where the evening had begun, the ugly Tuna Saluna, and they all went in for one last drink. Brian ended up going off on his own while the other three were there. Clint and Reed looked for Brian and called his name several times. After the pub closed at 2 a.m., they departed with the other customers and waited for Brian outside. But he wasn't there when everyone else left, so they figured he'd gone home without telling them. After that weekend, both Alexis and Brian's dad called, but got no response. He was supposed to fly to Miami with Alexis on Monday morning, but he ended up missing the trip. The police in Columbus, Ohio, were then notified that he was gone. The police started looking for Brian at his last known hangout, the ugly Tuna Saluna. Because of the high crime rate in the neighborhood surrounding South Campus Gateway, the pub has installed surveillance cameras. Brian, Clint, and Reed were seen at the bar's main entrance around 1:15 a.m. on the surveillance tape. At 1:55 a.m., Brian was captured on CCTV waving goodbye to two young women before walking out of the establishment. Soon after that, the ugly Tuna Saluna shuttered, and that was the last time anyone saw Brian. Because one camera had to be controlled manually and the other was constantly panning the scene, detectives concluded that Brian may have changed clothes at the pub or worn a hat while keeping his head dropped and his face obscured from the camera. According to the results of the probe, Brian may have used an alternative exit from the building. There was just one other way out of the building, and it went into a construction site that the responding police officers thought Brian would have had a hard time navigating sober, let alone drunk. They next examined video from other pubs to see if they could piece together how Brian had departed the ugly Tuna Saluna. Columbus has more security cameras than any other city in Ohio, more than Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Toledo combined. Nevertheless, there was no sign of him in CCTV footage from 3 other establishments in the area. At the ugly Tuna Saluna, the search spread out in all directions, with officers and canines combing the streets, checking dumpsters and other trash cans, and asking locals if they had seen Brian. His picture was widely disseminated on flyers, with many highlighting the tattoo on his upper right arm of the stick figure insignia from the cover artwork of the single Alive by Pearl Jam, one of his favorite bands. The Columbus police were even able to convince the city to allow an examination of the sewer system. There was no discovery of value. Brian's automobile was still parked in front of his King Avenue apartment, 6 blocks away from the bar. On the inside, everything seemed normal. After looking for hours in every direction from the ugly Tuna Saluna, the police began to investigate other explanations besides an accident or foul play. It was assumed that Brian had momentarily disappeared to mourn the loss of his mother alone. The fact remains, though, that he is gone for good. There seemed to be no logical explanation for his disappearance. Once Brian went missing, Alexis continued to make nightly calls to his phone. In September, the phone rang 3 times before finally going to voicemail. Even though no one answered, she kept trying to hear it, since it was truly incredible. She announced on MySpace. A representative from Brian's wireless carrier, Singular, told Alexis that the noise she heard could have been the result of a technical issue. Hilliard, located 14 miles, 23 kilometers, northwest of Columbus, received a ping from the phone. Several tips were given to the police, but none of them led to any new leads. Eddie Vedder, lead singer of Pearl Jam, paused in the middle of a show later that year in Cincinnati to plead for help in solving Brian's disappearance, but no suggestions were offered. Investigations were conducted into possible sightings in Michigan, Texas, and even Scandinavia. Randy Shaffer, who had recently lost his wife, kept looking for his missing son even after she passed away. He consulted a clairvoyant, who told him Brian's body was floating in the river at the bridge pier. Along with Brian's younger brother, Derek, and other locals who had taken an interest in the case, he acquired waders and spent much of his free time searching under bridges on the banks of Columbus's Olentangy River, which runs adjacent to the OSU's campus. Because of this, the authorities briefly considered the controversial smiley face murder scenario. Based on this scenario, Brian would be the lone undiscovered victim of the alleged serial killer. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies looked into Brian's case, but the Columbus police eventually rejected any connection to the supposed perpetrator. Randy Shaffer was removing garbage from the yard of his Baltimore, Maryland, house in September 2008 when a severe windstorm hit. His death was caused by a falling branch from a neighboring tree. The next morning, neighbors discovered his body and called the police. An online condolence book was made available after his obituary appeared. To Dad, Love Brian, U.S. Virgin Islands. Read one of the autographs within. This indicated that Brian had perhaps relocated his life away from Columbus. After additional examination, however, it was discovered that the note had been posted from a publicly accessible computer in Franklin County, and the whole thing was exposed as a hoax. In a letter to private investigator Don Corbett, shortly after Randy Shaffer's death, Clint's lawyer, Neil Rosenberg, expressed his client's continued refusal to undergo a lie detector test. Rosenberg hinted that the Columbus police who were looking into the case thought Brian was still alive. If Brian is alive, as I am led to think after consulting with the investigator involved, then it is Brian and not Clint who is causing misery and sorrow to his family. Rosenberg wrote, Brian needs to take the initiative to end this. He said that Clint did not have anything to hide because he had already disclosed all relevant information. Despite Rosenberg's claims, many of Brian's friends and family had chastised Clint for not being honest. Derek recalled that when the detective became involved, his friend lost touch with everyone. He has always had the impression that he knows something but won't admit it. He has not given up hope that Brian is still alive, and Clint is the only one who knows where he could be. As he put it, we simply always had a strong hunch that Clint would maybe know that if Brian had indeed disappeared. Alexis agrees with Brian that he is being secretive, but she concludes that her ex-boyfriend is probably dead and hasn't simply disappeared. I can't believe he just did that, she said. In 2014, Columbus police reported getting 2 tips per month through the local Crime Stoppers hotline, but none of them led to any new information or leads. 4 file boxes worth of paperwork were involved in the case's evidence. According to Columbus Monthly, one of the original investigators, Andrew Edwards, said that after a thorough analysis of the video footage from the ugly Tuna Saluna on the night Brian disappeared, he could state with 100% certainty that Brian did not escape through the escalator. The police had 3 possible explanations for the case, but they wouldn't talk to the magazine about any of them. In 2019, a photo of a claimed American homeless man with striking similarities to Brian began circulating online. The man was reportedly last seen in Tijuana, Mexico. The 2020 Columbus news station, 10 TV, that received the photo forwarded it to the investigator handling Brian's case. After sending the photo to the FBI for facial recognition processing, the detective was eliminated as a suspect. Nearly 15 years after Brian's disappearance, in March 2021, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation released a portrait of what he would look like at age 42. When Randy was still alive, he worked with the families of other missing adults in Ohio to campaign for a bill creating a statewide protocol for incidents like Brian's disappearance and his own death. It was up to individual departments at the time of Brian's disappearance, and several family members thought that the investigations into their loved ones' disappearances worsened as a result. The bill had already passed into law when Randy passed away. What are your takeaways from today's case? Do you think it's more likely that Brian slipped out without being spotted by the cameras, was murdered, and then his body was hidden somewhere? We would love to hear from you by commenting below. And when you're done, you can watch more hard cases by subscribing and visiting a vast variety of options through our playlist section. It's always being updated, so check back frequently. Thank you again for gracing us with your presence.